First thing is most farmers choose a system that actually fits their needs, fits their expectations, fits their management capability as well. Bulls are obviously far more demanding than steers and so on. And as you get down to maybe cull cows finishing, provided you take care of mastitis issues, they're very easy to manage other than that. And you know, they don't call on management as much. There's a huge range of issues then to be thought about depending on the system. And it's really particularly about getting the diet actually correct. It might be as basic as a concentrate, a compound concentrate for some people. It might fit their system well. They might have a bin. It'll avoid crow issues and so on. On another farm, you know, it might be a coarse ration that balances the silage perfectly. On the other hand, you know, if it's growing fodder beet, treating barley, it's about balancing it correctly and maybe buying either a balancer blend or a straights that will get over it. One thing I think I like to do is to keep things simple on farms. You know, there's no point in the world in spending the whole day feeding cattle when you have other things to do, so much so that you don't get to you know, deal with some of the husbandry issues. So if you can get all the small bits put into a balancer blend, that's the easiest thing to do. When I say that, I mean minerals. If you can use a feed urea, products like that they're all included there safely into one product. And it may be necessary to put in other straights as well, but all of that is, you know, can be catered for. We use a system based on a French system, which we find is the best system actually for calculating and balancing diets. And that, you know, it gives us everything right down to from dry matter intake, the capability of the animal, the biological model behind it. That's important, that we know what their capability for intake is, and that's driven by the type of animal. But also, as we, you know, as you come down the hierarchy then from the bulls down to the bullocks and the heifers, you know, the protein requirement drops, and we can see that. The most important part is whatever balance we're doing, that we're watching things like the potential for acidosis, avoiding the risk, putting in the insurance policies to make sure it doesn't happen, because it's lost performance. Lost performance is money down the drain. Likewise with protein, we just need to make sure, you know, if they're bulls, we might be up at 14, 15 in the total diet or somewhere in between. On the other hand, if we're finishing cull cows and even some of the traditional heifers at the end, 12% protein ration will get us out the gate without major difficulty. One of the real challenges then, I think, that's left that needs to be mastered in a lot of farms is getting the fat cover for the young cattle, particularly on the 16-month bull beef. Sometimes you almost have to go directly with putting in fat in the diet, and the easiest way of doing that is by putting it in a product that contains it. One of those would be maize germ meal, and it's within the cell. It's almost like feeding a protected fat. It gets through the body quite safely. It goes straight to body fat, and it also colours the fat a little bit, makes it more yellow, which reads, you know, it always reads well when it comes to grading at the end of the day. But that's probably one of the biggest challenges left for farmers at the moment, is getting that fat cover at a young age and getting that premium. Covering all the options is I suppose is tricky enough, but we have a huge array of rations available to us to do that, depending on the circumstances. And the compounds, you know, just at one end we have a complete beef compound, which we use quite a bit with bull beef, performs superbly, you know, with a small amount of silage. Maybe a half kilo of straw can be fed at close to ad lib levels pretty much. Ad lib isn't necessarily always the most efficient. When you get to the ad lib level, if you just pull them back a kilo or two, let them eat a little bit more forage, your performance is probably better per kilogram of feed. On the other hand, steers on the same farm, fed on the same silage, fast finisher with a slightly lower protein, might actually do the job a little bit better in that scenario. You know, we also have beef maker. Beef maker as a compound works particularly well with traditional heifers, Angus heifer, cross heifers. It gets the finish on them very well. On the coarse end, for example, even though we haven't exhausted the compound in at that, on the younger stock and store cattle, we have a product called Master Blend, which is a higher protein, and we also have a weaning build in the compound version for young growing cattle as well, which is a higher protein product. All of those have the appropriate additives in to suit that kind of scenario, and we have a mega beef blend to suit some of the more intensive finishing ones. On top of that, then we have some very high maize blends that we have, you know, do especially on a bulk tip basis where there's high levels of usage on the farm. So there's a whole range there right across the board with good feed additives in there. The main source of energy in our better rations is native grain, and obviously native grain is a high quality product. It feeds very well, we know where it comes from, and it's reliable in terms of performance. We also use quite a bit of maize in there, and all of those are balanced to be safe to feed at the levels that are in the rations. Between both forms of grain, we often have 50–60% in the ration. Obviously, we have to find space for protein in there and for fibre to keep the ration balanced together with minerals. I think it's also important that minerals are covered, and a lot of the cattle that are bought as weanlings that haven't been gone through a good weaning program, they will come in deficient of minerals, and that leaves them more exposed in terms of their immune system to things like pneumonia and so on. So it's important when they come in first that they do get a good dose of protected minerals through the feed or some other way to build them up. It leaves the whole system that little bit safer.